The key topic today is structural functionalism. In organizational theory, structural functionalism is looking at how tasks interact with the behaviors and pressures from people on both inside and the outside of the organization. In other words, we're looking at how can we control outcomes and if or whether that is an exclusive relationship with building relationships. So I think the easiest way to kind of break it down is to say, is your organization or is your leader task-oriented or people-oriented? When we look at some of the key ideas out of Marion and Gonzalez, some of the big concepts to frame this next part of our conversation is how our organizations act as structures and how they are affected by human needs and interactions. Looking at how leaders influence others and if there's a relationship between that effective leadership and organizational effectiveness. Our leadership theories really help us construct meaning of what it means to be a leader. And ultimately, we're trying to influence others to meet organizational goals.
Are great leaders born or made? It's a timeless question, right? Are great leaders born or made? And apparently Marshall responds, so. Great leaders are born, then made. And I think this is a very important idea because as managers, if you regard one of our most important jobs is our own continual growth and development and the growth and development of the people around us. If you do not have the assumption that great leaders can be made, then it really is a developmental process. You end up just trying to pick people, right? This is a trap organizations get into all the time. They're trying to pick the right people to get in the right jobs, which is perfectly understandable. But then they completely forget the real question is, how does the person grow and develop in that job? So naturally, as businesses, we're always trying to recruit and hire talented people. Great, very important. But we miss the question, do we create an environment where those people will continually grow and develop once we have them?
While your readings provide a much more in-depth view of leadership theories, I just want to provide us with a quick overview, focusing on the trait theories of leadership, the power approaches to leadership, and the behaviors of leadership with an emphasis on McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. The trait theory of leadership focuses on identifying different personality traits and characteristics that can be linked to successful leadership in a variety of situations. There's a whole line of research that really looks at the nature of effective leadership, and it's tied to that heroic leader or the great man theory of leadership that was first proposed by Thomas Carlyle in the mid-1800s. According to Carlyle, history was shaped by extraordinary leaders, and he made the argument that the ability to lead was something that people are simply born with. Carlyle did not believe that leadership could be developed, and while his ideas inspired a lot of the early research on leadership, most of it was focused on inheritable traits. So when we look at the newer research, specifically wk2, there was a definite switch in how we were looking at leadership. And leaders tended to have certain traits, and it's through those traits that even when the differences were very small, people in leadership positions would display more of those traits than they would in subordinate positions. If you're looking at the slide right now, you'll see a comparison, a side-by-side comparison of the early studies of leadership contrasted with Uckel's studies from 1994. There are some strengths to trait theory. I mean, it's appealing. It matches what are some of the commonly held ideas that people have about leadership. And there's a lot of research that tries to confirm it nearly 100 years prior to some of the more modern studies. The highlights of the leader component of leadership looks at how the leader acts, the followers, and then even the scenarios or specific situations. The bottom line is that trait theory provides leaders with benchmarks that help to identify some strengths and weaknesses and might actually help improve performance. Some of the traits most commonly associated with leadership include intelligence, action-oriented judgment, the eagerness to accept responsibility, how we understand followers and their needs, people skills, and that's not an exclusive list. And I know that Marion and Gonzalez does cover more of those traits, but there are still some criticisms of this trait theories. There's no delimited or definitive list of leadership traits. Different research studies will show an endless list of traits, and so some of the findings have been ambiguous. Trait theory doesn't account for different scenarios or even how a situation might impact the type of leadership that is applied. And so I think it leaves us with looking at trait theory as somewhat subjective interpretation of some of the most important leadership traits. I asked you on an earlier slide what you thought were some of the important characteristics of leaders, and if we were to compare everyone in this class's list, I imagine that there would be some things that are very similar and some things that are very different. So far, I've talked about trait theory, but haven't really touched into some of the other theories. Marion and Gonzalez do mention the behavioral theories, looking at what good leaders do based on the leader's behavior. And there are also several contingency theories about the situation influencing good leadership. I would like to touch a little bit more on power and influence theories and looking at the source of a leader's power. And when you look at these theories of leadership, they take a very different approach. They're based on the different ways that leaders use power and influence to get things done, and then they look at the leadership styles that emerge as a result. One of the best known of these theories is French and Raven's 5 forms of power. You'll see on the slide the comparison between those forms of power. The model highlights positional power, looking at legitimacy, reward, coercion, and then 2 sources of personal power, expert and referent. In other words, your personal appeal and your charm. The model suggests that using personal power is a better alternative and that you should work on building expert power. So that power that comes from being a real expert in your job, because that is the most legitimate source of personal power. Take some time to review the slide on the power approaches to leadership, paying attention to the type of power used and how compliance is achieved. In Chapter 2, Marion and Gonzalez introduced the concepts of Theory X and Theory Y. For your reference, check pages 40 and 41 for details on these 2 theories. It's relevant here as we look at the motivational psychology of human relations and the ancient debates about human nature. Are humans good or are humans bad? That debate is at the core of human relation theorist Douglas McGregor's conceptualization of motivation. The human is bad thesis, which he labeled Theory X, says that workers are lazy, mean-spirited, and opposed to work. Theory Y is the human is good philosophy. He says basically that workers are cooperative, caring, friendly, industrious, and responsible. The following slides outline McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Marion and Gonzalez state that Theory X motivation requires that managers organize the productive enterprise around economic goals and that they organize and control worker behavior with rewards and punishment. Marion and Gonzalez also state that Theory Y managers recognize and develop the human potential. that they develop worker capacity to assume responsibility, and they provide an environment in which workers can achieve their goals. Theory X, educational administrators motivate with threats and close supervision. Theory Y, administrators motivate with trust, shared responsibility, and encourage risk-taking and creativity with collaboration and collegiality. The final few slides of our presentation capture the big ideas, a powerful quote from Nelson Mandela, and the references that were used to put this presentation together. I hope that you have a great week and that you reach out if you have any questions about our material this week. Thank you.